tender pork chops in a delicious gravy served with buttery mashed potatoes, and we're gonna do it all in one pot. Welcome to the Salted Pepper, where we cook for real life using real food and we keep it real simple. And today's recipe is for pork chops and gravy and mashed potatoes. I'm gonna do it in the Ninja Foodi pressure cooker, but you could do it in any pressure cooker that you have. This is such an easy meal to make. You're going to be blown away, and the results are fabulous. So let's dive right into it. We are going to preheat the pot on high sear saute. Let the pot heat up for about 2 to 3 minutes. Then we'll add in some olive oil to brown up our pork chops. Now for the pork chops, I'm using about 2.5 pounds. So you can use anywhere from 2 to 3 pounds in this recipe, and the rest of your ingredients will be fine, okay? For that amount, you won't need to make any adjustments. I'm using center cut, boneless 1-inch pork chops. You can use bone in, but the timing's going to be a little bit different. If you follow the same timing, you're gonna have delicious pork chops, but they are gonna be falling apart. So look at my website, thesaltedpepper.com, for the written recipe, and I'll talk about the timing if you wanna use bone-in pork chops. But for this, I'm gonna use the boneless. They work out great. Then you're gonna wanna get a large Ziploc bag and put 1/2 cup of all-purpose flour right into the bag. And then you can use my seasoning blend, or you can use whatever seasoning blend that you like. What I have here is 1.5 teaspoons of fine grind sea salt, or you could use kosher salt, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, 1.5 teaspoons of garlic powder, 1.5 teaspoons of onion powder, 1/2 teaspoon of dried thyme leaves, and 1/2 teaspoon of dried rosemary leaves. Make sure you're not using ground thyme or ground rosemary because they are different. If you only have those spices in your cabinet, just reduce the amount to about 1/4 teaspoon. All right, dump those into your flour. Sort of give it a mix around. And then we're gonna add in 3 pork chops at a time and toss them. And this is 6 pork chops. I mean, that varies because they vary by weight, but based on my tests, usually the 6 pork chops is gonna be somewhere between 1.5 pounds and 2 pounds. So if you don't have a scale, just do 6 boneless pork chops. And then toss this around and let the seasoned flour coat all sides of the pork chop. Now you may have noticed I didn't even trim the pork chops. That fat along the sides, that's gonna add flavor to our gravy. Leave it on there. You don't even have to trim these. So this makes prep super easy. Put in about 2 to 3 tablespoons of olive oil so you lightly coat the bottom of the pot. Now let that heat up for about 2 minutes before we start putting our first batch of pork chops into brown. All right, I'm seeing the olive oil start to smoke, so let's go ahead and get one of these in. All right, there we go. Put them in a single layer in the bottom of the pot. And then we're gonna add the rest of these pork chops to the bag and get them tossed around. And you wanna saute them on each side for about 2 to 3 minutes, or until they're nicely brown on both sides. All right, I'm gonna flip these over. They're looking good. After the second side browns up, what you can do is just stack them on top of each other for now so that you have room to put the remaining pork chops in. I only have 1 more pork chop to go, so I'm gonna put it right in that little space. And you're gonna have some flour left. Do not discard that. We are going to use that. All right, there we go. All right, now we want to deglaze the pot and remove all of this darker, what they call fond. So put 3/4 cup of chicken stock or chicken broth in the bottom, and then just sort of swirl everything around just to lift up anything that might be stuck on there. Okay, there we go. That's gonna prevent the water notice. So once you deglaze, go ahead and turn the foodie off, unless you're able to add in all your vegetables and get your potatoes on top very quickly. We don't want to burn off this liquid. We're using a very small amount of liquid, 3/4 of a cup in the 6.5 quart, and about 1 cup in the 8 quart pressure cooker would be ideal. And the reason why we're using such a little amount of liquid is because we want a thick gravy at the end, right? But we can't pressure cook with thick liquids. So we need that thin liquid to produce the steam that puts us under pressure. And if we kept this on sear saute, it is steaming so much, we would steam off a lot of that thin liquid and you may get the water notice. So this type of recipe is not tricky, but you do need to follow the instructions. So turn the Ninja Foodi off and then proceed with the next step, which is going to be to add in the onions. This is 1 sweet onion. It's about a cup, and they're just sliced. So I cut the onion in half, remove the skin, and then just slice them up. So I'm gonna add those right on top. The next thing I'm gonna add are some quartered mushrooms. I love mushrooms, and I love mushrooms in my gravy. These are totally optional. No changes to the recipe if you omit them. I have about 12 ounces, which is 4 cups of quartered mushrooms. And I have both portobello, small baby portobello, and white button mushrooms. You can use either type or a combination. You can use anywhere from 8 ounces to a pound of mushrooms or totally omit them. It does not change the recipe at all, okay? But I just love mushrooms so much. So I'm gonna add those in. All right, now just put this all on top. Okay, now you're gonna think I've lost my mind. Trust me though, trust me. The rest of the flour, we're gonna put it right on top here. This is going to thicken our gravy, but not until after we go under pressure. And that is the secret to this recipe. All right, so once the flour is sprinkled on top, do not stir. We do not want that flour down in the liquid yet. It will happen. We will get that mixed in at the end. But for right now, leave it on top. Okay, so now for the potatoes. You can use 1.5 to 2 pounds of russet potatoes, or you could use Yukon Gold if that's your preference, or you could use a combination of both. And you want to peel the russets, but leave them whole. That's very important. We're going under a long pressure cook time. So leave them whole. Whatever potatoes you use, leave them whole. If you're gonna use little small potatoes, just know they are gonna get very, very soft. So try to use potatoes that are about 6 ounces each at minimum, okay? These are between 6 and 8 ounces each. Then we need to put on a little rack. Now, the type of rack that you put into your pressure cooker will depend on what pressure cooker you have, what model you have, and what you have available at home. Worst case scenario, you could put just a little bit of tin foil there and put your potatoes on top just to keep it out of the gravy, because we want a nice buttery mashed potato, just like if we boiled these on the stove. And if they sink down into the gravy, well, they're gonna be covered with gravy, which isn't bad. It's just not what we're going for here. So you could use this rack, which would sit right down into the dish, and then put your potatoes there. That gives us enough room, I believe, enough clearance. Yeah, that would be fine. That's what I'm gonna do. But I also wanted to give you another option. This reversible rack is not gonna work in the 6.5 quart for this recipe because it's not gonna give you enough clearance, even if you set it all the way down, I don't think. Now, you could try it if you want. I'm not going to, because why dirty 2 of them? But if you have the 8 quart, you could use the reversible rack, and that's gonna work fine. You're gonna have it in the high position and just nestle it all the way down and then put your potatoes on top. Worst case scenario, you can cut the potatoes in half, but then they are going to be very, very soft. Of course, we're mashing them. That's not gonna affect the outcome of the potatoes, but they may break up and go into your gravy a little bit, which actually, that's not gonna be a problem either. Or if you have this crisping tray, you can put that on top as well. That works. I've done it this way. But for today, we're gonna use this little rack. I'm gonna nestle this down in here and put my potatoes on. One other quick thing to note, if you are using the 1-lid pressure cooker, okay, the OL series, this rack may not work for you because you're gonna be putting down the same lid, so you might not have the clearance. I'm using the 2-lid model, which has a little domed lid here, so we have extra clearance. The other thing I want to mention, because I know a lot of people have pressure cookers and there's a max fill line, and you may think that by me putting these potatoes on here, I'm going against the rule of pressure cooking in the max fill line. I am not. It is perfectly safe to do this. That max fill line is for the food in the pot itself and mostly for a liquid measurement, okay? And that is because of the way pressure cooking works. So this is perfectly fine to stack some potatoes on top of your main dish. All right, let's get the pressure lid on. Make sure the valve is sealed in the back. And we're gonna go on high pressure, and we wanna go for 30 minutes. It'll take anywhere from 8 to 10 minutes for the pot to come to pressure, especially now that I turned it off, okay? If you had everything ready and you weren't talking through a video, you could probably have left it on and just kept building the dish and gotten it right under, with the pressure lid on and started the pressure cooking right away. And that would even take less time to come to pressure because your pot and your liquid's already gonna be super hot. So anywhere from 8 to 10 minutes for me, and probably 5 to 7 minutes if your pot stayed on the entire time. After the time is up, this is very important, do a full natural release. That means you do nothing. You don't release the pressure at all. You let it naturally release. And what is meant by a natural release is actually the temperature in the pot reduces. Therefore, the steam that put us under pressure reverts back into liquid form, and that is what's going to reduce the pressure, drop the pin, and allow us to open up the pot. And we want that liquid back into our pork chops and into our gravy for this dish. So a full natural release, and that takes about 25 to 30 minutes, okay? It took 33 minutes for the pin to drop, but now the natural release is complete, and you can open up the lid. Do that away from you because it is going to be steamy. And we've got our potatoes on top. That's the first thing I'm gonna deal with. I have a mixing bowl here, and just pull the potatoes out and put them in the bowl. Now you can, of course, use an electric masher if you want. I'm gonna do this by hand. I like kind of a more rustic type of mashed potato when I serve it with pork chops and gravy. And let's go ahead and move this rack out. All right, now before I get to mashing these, I just want to turn this over. You can see a little bit of that flour. So while this is still on keep warm, and before we start kind of mixing everything up and thickening our gravy a little bit, I'm going to turn that over so that the flour has a chance to absorb some of the liquid. All right, back to the potatoes. Here we go. Take a potato masher, whatever kind you want, and start to break these up to let a little bit of the steam out. This will dry the potatoes, and it actually results in a much better mashed potato, in my opinion. All right, so there we go. So just mash those up, and then I leave that in. We're gonna put in some butter, some cream, salt, and pepper. How much you use is up to you. I'm gonna start with 4 tablespoons of salted butter and about 4 tablespoons of heavy cream, but I almost always have to use a little bit more cream. So I poured out a half of a cup in here. And then I'm gonna start with a half of a teaspoon of salt, and I'll add more as needed. If you like pepper in your potatoes, which I happen to like, you can use as much or as little as you want. I'm gonna start with about 1/4 of a teaspoon of pepper, and then set these over to the side, uncovered for right now, okay? Bring a platter or whatever you're gonna put your pork chops on and pull each pork chop out. But before you remove the pork chops, you want to kind of give them a little bath in the juices, because there may be some clumps of the seasoned flour still on the pork chop. We want that in the liquid, not on the pork chop, okay? That's gonna help thicken our gravy in just a minute. Those are just mushrooms there. And do that with each pork chop and pull them out. Oh my gosh, they look so good. Look at the browning on them. They are just gorgeous. Okay, once all of the pork is out on your platter, then take a spoon and move this gravy around. And if there's any big pieces of fat, you can go ahead and remove those. Like I see one right there. So I'm gonna remove that and just put that in a little bowl. This is a good thickness. So see, once we sort of, I call it giving them a bath. Once we gave the pork chops a bath and knocked off any of the extra flour that was on there, it combines with that liquid and it makes a beautiful mushroom and onion gravy. This is gonna be so delicious. So now when I serve it, what I do is I just sort of pour this all over top of the pork chops, just like that. And then of course, put some in a container for extra gravy. All right, I'm gonna set those to the side and let's finish up mashing our potatoes, and I'll pile those on right there. So now that they've kind of dried up a little bit, they are not gonna be as gummy. If you've ever mashed potatoes and you have gotten them where they're kind of a gummy texture, that is because the steam wasn't released. So this helps to keep them nice and light and fluffy. I guess I should say that's one of the reasons why they become gummy. There's other reasons too. Undercooked, different kind of potato, things like that. All right, so they look great, but I do need a little bit more moisture, so I'm gonna add another tablespoon or two of that heavy cream, or you could add butter. And then I'll give a taste for seasonings and we will serve all this up. Now, if you weren't going to serve this right away, put some saran wrap over your potatoes. Keep your pork chops. You have to remove them to finish the gravy up. But once the gravy's finished, like this, put your pork chops back in and leave it on keep warm until you're ready to serve it, okay? And these pork chops are so tender that they are falling apart almost. So they are going to be amazingly delicious. And did you see the browning? That's because they were sitting on the bottom of the pot. I mean, these do not even look like they were pressure cooked. They are beautiful. You are gonna love them. All right, that looks good. All right, let me bring a little plate up. I'm just, for the tasting purposes, I'm just gonna grab a couple of these pieces that sort of broke off. Oh my gosh. And of course I'm gonna grab some mushrooms. This looks so good. I better get up there. And a little bit more gravy because I love this gravy. Look at that. Of course, a little bit of mashed potatoes here. Just use this. Get them off here. There we go. Oh my gosh. And then serve it with whatever vegetable you want. I have a little bit of broccoli that I steamed. All right. Pork first, okay? I know the mashed potatoes are gonna be delicious. They're gonna be delicious however you make them as well. But let's get to the pork because that is the star of the show. And it holds together, even though, I mean, they did kind of break apart, but it holds together. It is a pork chop. This is not like shredded pork. But it is melt in your mouth tender. Oh my goodness. Wow, that is amazing. The seasonings are spot on. The pork is so tender. Let me explain real quick why they're not dry. 30-minute pressure cook time. That's a long time, right? You might think, you're crazy. Those pork chops are gonna be way overcooked. They're gonna be dry. They're not, because they are in that liquid and they are being taken, they're way like over the 145 that you would use in a dry cooking environment, because we went under pressure in a moist cooking environment and we took that pork chop past 145, past 165. We got up probably into the 200s. So they're super tender, but they are not dry. They are absolutely delicious. Oh my goodness. Now the mushrooms, again, 30 minutes of pressure cook time. But the one thing that I've noticed about mushrooms is they can withstand really long pressure cook times, and they are still going to have a bite to them. They are so, so delicious. Wow. This is unbelievable, really. Now, I will say right now, just by looking at this, my potatoes are a little on the dry side. And I needed to add a little bit more liquid. Probably gonna add a little bit more butter after the video. And a little bit more salt. I forgot to taste them before I put them on my plates. They need a little bit more salt, but look, they are delicious. So good. Serve them up with some steamed broccoli or Brussels sprouts or whatever vegetable you like, and you have a super easy and delicious dinner.